The presenting sponsor for OnEducation is Classcraft. We're excited to announce Classcraft's new story mode, which makes it easy for educators to harness the power of stories. Episodes 1 and 2 of Season 1 are ready for you and your students to play today, and it's completely free. To learn more about Classcraft and the new story mode, simply visit classcraft.com/oneducation. Maybe we think about those things that much more before we put them out there to the world.
Welcome to OnEducation, part of the Education Podcast Network. I'm Mike Washburn.
And I'm Glen Irvin. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. We will debate whether handwriting is still a viable skill and discuss the release of the new iPadOS. We're going to have a tough but important conversation about how teachers deal with the loss of a student in their classroom. And our guests this week are Stephanie Carmichael and Devin Young from Classcraft.
So I've been riding the hell out of my bike.
Yeah, how is that? I was going to ask you the last time we were talking as far as like what is that setup like? I saw a video where there's a bike up on a stand. Is that how yours works?
Yeah, so it's called a bike trainer.
Yeah.
And the wheel spins on a magnetically controlled wheel inside of this unit, and it's what's called a smart trainer, which means that I'm actually using a program, a game actually called Zwift. So Zwift is a gamified cycling app. So it shows like all your data related to your biking, but you're an avatar riding a bike on a street in an environment.
Okay.
And what it does is it as you go up and down hills, and as it's asking for, like if you're in like an exercise program, as it's asking for certain like output of your speed or power,
it's adjusting that?
It transmits that information to the trainer on the floor, and the trainer adjusts based on what it's looking for.
So it restricts the tire or whatever might be, so that
it slows down,
makes it more difficult to climb, etc.
100%.
Got it.
So I'm just getting started, but it's a lot of fun. I knew it. I kind of knew it would be, but I didn't think I'd sink into the rabbit hole as much as I've sunk. Like I'm watching YouTube videos every night about it, and how to like learn how to use it, and I'm already thinking about what I'm gonna buy next in terms of like I need a new bike. Like for sure, I need a new bike.
Okay.
I kind of just took like. I actually have a picture that I'm gonna put in I'm gonna give it to, I'm not sure who's writing the blog post this week, but I'll give it to whoever's writing the blog post of my current setup. Like we've said with so many other things, like in terms of like games-based learning and like everything, you have to start. You just have to, at some point, you just got to get up off your butt and do that thing that you wanted to do. And so like I took my mountain bike, which is not the right bike for this. You're supposed to use a road bike, but I took it into a bike shop and I said, can you like jerry rig a road wheel onto the back wheel of my mountain bike? And they did, which is awesome. And then I've got it on the trainer, but my hands are killing me because the mountain bike handles are not not suited for riding for 45 minutes in this type of situation. And I'm just not used to it. Like the seat is not ideal, so my butt's always sore, and it's just but I'm into it, and I'm powering through it, and I'm excited because I'm trying to get in shape, and I'm making some changes, and things are happening, and I think I kind of feel better already. Like I'm pumped. I was curious if you've started hot yoga yet.
I have not. There's a place to be able to go ahead and do this, and they started basically a whole new fitness club in the town that we live in. So it'll be very interesting to see what ends up how it ends up going, and I'm excited to do it. I actually do some yoga with my wife. But I just got to do more. And I just am interested in this specifically because I've heard lots of positive things about it. And then I'll have a gym membership again. And then like you just were talking about,
Yeah.
Just basically going ahead and consistently going there. Versus
Yeah.
consistency versus intensity. I've heard that that's important. Just consistently go ahead and do whatever you're going to do to be able to keep your body in shape.
I've been meditating too. I won't lie,
Whoa,
and I'm like the least, like you said, whoa there. Like I'm the least likely person I think that people would think would meditate.
how's that
But
going? Are you
um,
doing guided meditation or are you doing?
it's just to help me fall asleep.
Okay.
So I've been doing like a 5 minute guided thing on Calm. There's like an
Mm-hmm.
app called Calm.
Yep.
So I just turn on one of the 5 minute sleep ones, and it helps me just
Calm down.
put away the day, which
Yeah.
is hard, very hard for me. So to move on, I think who could use the Calm app at least today was Greta Thunberg. This is the kid, the climate change activist Greta Thunberg. First off, she's a beast, like an
Yeah.
absolute torture. She just does not give a damn about your feelings. I love it. I love that kids everywhere, like we saw this after Parkland, and we're seeing that kids are vocalizing their displeasure with how a large majority, not a large majority, a majority of adults have absolutely like destroyed things for them. And we're seeing like this child activism stuff is blowing my mind, and Greta Thunberg is just she's gonna be a force for her whole life, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What a kid, eh?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if this really does carry over. We thought when we barely started this podcast, I think it was right around the Parkland shooting,
Right
or
around
at least it was the reaction that we were having to the
just a
shooting.
couple weeks after it.
And we had talked about at that time how young people everywhere, we believed were going to actively get involved in politics, making sure that their voices were heard. But really, the most important thing, especially in the United States, that they would gather the forces that they needed to be able to get out and really vote. And we still haven't really seen that. The numbers are still just horrible for our 21 and under youth. And so our 18 to 21-year-olds, it would be awesome if the combination of all of these things, whether it be Greta or for example, the Parkland survivors that were out there speaking, and really gathering force, and then being able to go ahead and do something with that, basically getting out there and then pushing, making sure that they are a heard voice in our politics and that people are actually listening to them. Because the biggest demographic that still consistently votes, and really where a lot of politicians still talk specifically to, are retired people, and especially in the United States. We're talking about people that are over the age of 62. They consistently go to the voting polls or voting booths, and they consistently vote. And so
they're also pretty consistently single issue voters too. Most people in that age group care about taxes virtually singularly. So
and so it's time. It would be amazing if in this next election, whichever way they decide to vote, and that's how we were talking about over a year ago, whatever the side that you decide to go ahead and take, but really just to have your voice heard, and then to get out there and making sure that you do vote. And this is one of many things that are happening right now in our world that actually are positive things. They're standing up for their environment, for their future, which is awesome. And that's what we want all of our students to do.
So I've been historically pretty anti handwriting education, learning it in especially like cursive. Like I've been pretty consistent about not teaching cursive in school. At least teach it in. I don't have a problem with it being taught in art, at least historically. I'm going to preface this by saying historically, because one of the other things that I am, and I think you know this about me, is I'm open to having a meaningful conversation if you can just present evidence. If you can tell me why I'm wrong, I'm open to being convinced. And I think that this article is super interesting about handwriting and how it's good for your brain. So Glenn, here's your moment of opportunity. Sell me on handwriting, man.
I think, I mean, the biggest takeaways from this article are that the act of handwriting is slower than the ability to be able to type. And we know that for a fact, which actually, through brain research, they've shown that actually makes a better connection to whatever it is that you're writing down. And then something else is really important as far as part of this article that I thought it really stuck with me, and I posted something about it on Twitter. And basically, it's the concept of, because we have to slow down to write something out, maybe we think about those things that much more before we put them out there to the world. So, for example, it's too often that we quickly can respond to whatever might be out there and with rage, and then throw it out there because we can text it out real super fast with our phones, or we can type it out super fast, obviously on our keyboards. But there's a quote here that says, if words weren't quite so easy to produce, it's possible that people would treat them, and then this part, and maybe each other, with a little more care. And that part really struck home with me, because it is so easy for us to email each other, text each other, and a lot of times these things are loaded with emotions of the specific moment. Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation with my wife and really about the concept of writing out letters and how that's a lost art, and how if you write a letter to somebody and physically write it out and then put it in, send it through the post office and send it this way, there's kind of there is a bigger emotional connection. We know that for sure, than, for example, posting on someone's Facebook page or on Twitter or whatever types of social media, or even an email where it's very impersonal. There's something to that. Now, as far as the brain research is concerned here, it's documented that because you're writing it out and taking that time, it's working a different part of your brain. There's a guy that I follow, and I'm not going to remember his name, on YouTube, that I really like. He's a pre-med doctor, and I think I've mentioned him on this show for other topics. But really, he's a big proponent of, he has an iPad and an iPad pencil, and using apps like Notability. And when he was in med school, he basically shows you how to take notes and how to make sure you can remember. Imagine when you're in medical school, all the content you have to remember, and shows you how basically to connect that writing and then the ability to take notes in a handwritten style, and then make sure that you can actually put it into your long-term memory, not a short-term memory, but long-term memory, and how it made him that much more productive of a medical student and that much better and now of a doctor, because he has this knowledge and he actually has remembered it all. It's super fascinating. That's anecdotal, of course, but still there's something to that. We'll have to let our audience, check it out and see, there's obviously some studies here that they refer to all in the article itself too.
It's funny. That's a strong argument for me, because as a history major also, and maybe I'm being a little bit hypocritical, because I also historically have lamented the notion of, our history being digitized, like our current, our contemporaneous notes are digital. And, when the hard drives die and the whatever happens to servers happens, a lot of this stuff is going to get lost. And, we don't write like in the 1800s. You had people, and even like in going back, like you had people writing books, journals. You had, people, especially people who are prolific at this, who had a library full of notebooks of their notes over their entire life. And now we have this like rich record, a primary source record of someone's life in the world and what it was like. And, we're not going to, 300 years from now,
Our
this
primary
is,
source record is going to be
this is
Donald
going to be
Trump's Twitter messages.
it's going to be a weird issue that, like, if we develop technology that, we're going to need to figure out how to like take everything from YouTube and where's it going to go, because that is like the a giant slice of modern life is, our existence on YouTube. And 500 years from now, I'm interested in thinking a little bit about where that stuff goes. So I also, when you said writing down your notes on an iPad and stuff, that's super interesting stuff. And I've loved the idea for a long time of potentially, keeping notebooks and writing notes. But most people just like me and whatever just don't do it, and it's kind of a shame. We're going to link that article in the show notes because it did get some traction on the Twitters this week, and I saw it bouncing around after you shared it, and I thought it was super interesting. But speaking of iPads, though, there's some new updates this week. It's pretty exciting in Apple land this week with iOS 13, which is the phone update, but then the new iPadOS. So it's an entirely different branch of iOS that just came out. I believe that it launches out of beta tomorrow. So today is Monday. So tomorrow, I've been using it on both of my iPads in beta for a couple days just to kind of see what it was like. And it's pretty interesting. Talk about a couple of your favorite features that you've seen to have caught on to here.
Yeah, so I think that the biggest issue with an iPad, and I actually heard it today in a conversation with one of my colleagues, is basically that a iPad can't mimic the ability, for example, that a MacBook can do. And what I'm talking about is the ability to basically do multiple things at the exact same time. And it doesn't do it very well. Now, we've had split screen, so that was already available as far as being able to have two things on there. But this new OS is just ridiculous, the operating system, as far as the ability to have tons of apps and information all at your fingertips there, and then the ability to be able to slide past multiple apps and be able to go ahead and easily go from two screens and then layer even another app on top of that to toggle between all of them. And the videos that I was watching, as far as the guy that was showing a tutorial about how to go about doing this, oh my goodness, this slide over mechanism is just fantastic, and has huge implications for our students. So I can't wait to see it in our students' hands, and then be able to see kind of what can they do then to be able to be working on, for example, in Notability and have Schoology up, or have a reference page up and Notability, and then various different other apps that they're swiping through to be able to go ahead and be productive. That I thought was phenomenal.
The browser experience is so much better. Like the at least on it's funny, on the iPad Pro that I have I have the keyboard case, and I'll tell you, when you're browsing Safari and you have a keyboard with your iPad, it feels like I'm working on a laptop. The browsing experience is amazing. Really, really smooth, really quick, and basically almost exact. Like, I can't tell the difference between Safari on iPadOS and Safari on my MacBook Air. In fact, I would suggest it's almost better on the iPadOS than on the MacBook Air. So
and one of the biggest complaints, Mike, that people had about just being on an iPad in general was editing text. So writing text, you could type up things, people were okay with that, but then going back and editing was very clumsy. So this update has all kinds of new touch shortcuts for editing text. For example, there's this 3-finger pinch that you can do to be able to copy sections of things, to be able to cut, and then 3-finger kind of push your fingers out to be able to paste segments. And it looks so awesome and smooth. And it's such a great idea as far as the combination of, like you just said, if you have a keyboard there, you're keyboarding, but now you can actually touch the screen and then be able to use the 2 things at the exact same time to quickly be able to edit text, which I thought was another fantastic idea, especially huge implications for our students. So now the biggest debate is going to be, and I mean, I've heard that Apple people continue to say, those of you that already have MacBooks are never going to look back and say, maybe we should think about iPads for our students. But I am thinking about that for a couple of different reasons. One, I'm seeing that this OS is really top notch and you can do things similar to what you would do on a MacBook. And then secondly, the ability to be able to write is so huge. We're missing out on all of our math students as far as being able to use a MacBook for any reason except for maybe watching a flip video. Very few functionality within a MacBook in math class. You know what I mean? But if you actually could use your pencil and you were actually writing things out, you're taking your notes, you are writing the things. If you used, for example, Nearpod on open response questions or the draw questions, you could write out your answers as far as for math class. There's a lot of things that could happen that can't happen right now with our MacBook. Now, not that MacBook isn't awesome, but I'm just saying that we should definitely at least take a look at it and then make sure that when we make that decision, whether we go with, a laptop type of device or an iPad, that you take all of those things into consideration.
It's going to force some districts to rethink some things, especially if they're in the process of purchasing right now. So we'll put some stuff in the show notes and definitely hit us back. Maybe we'll by the time this episode comes out, the iPadOS will be out. So maybe we'll put a chat in the chat on education, see what people are thinking about it if they've had a chance to update. I imagine one of the hardest things a teacher has to go through is the loss of a student. How do you keep it together yourself? How do you cope? How do you lead your kids through it all at the same time? We haven't all been through this battle before, but I think it would help to hear from someone who has. It's not the easiest conversation in the world, but I think it's an important one. We'll talk about that when we come back, so stay with us.
OnEducation is brought to you by Pick My Kid. Pick My Kid is an automated dismissal solution that cuts car line time in half. It engages parents with the Parent app by being able to change dismissal routines right from their phone. Friends, that means no more front office calls. Pick My Kid is an affordable solution for schools and removes dismissal stress for parents, teachers, and staff. For more information, visit pickmykid.com. That's P-I-K, mykid.com. OnEducation is also brought to you by Taylor Ed. As teachers, meeting the needs of each and every student in today's classroom is time-consuming, complicated, and just overwhelming. Taylor Ed makes differentiation in math effortless through curated resources, smart student grouping, and student insights beyond proficiency. Sign up today using the promo code OnEducation and receive 3 months free on us. Visit taylor-ed.com for more information.
Welcome back. Before we get started, I wanted to say that this next segment of our podcast deals with some pretty tragic issues surrounding death and the loss of children. If you'd feel more comfortable, feel free to skip forward past this section. Recently, a member of our team and friend, Melissa Pilikowski, had to go through what has to be, I imagine, one of the hardest things any teacher would have to endure in their career, the loss of a student. This isn't an easy thing to think about and to talk about, but we reached out to her in the hopes that she could come on the podcast and talk to us about it. And she's been gracious enough to say yes and joins us now. Thanks, Melissa.
Oh, thanks, Mike. It's always good to be here.
So I don't have a really strong sense of other than our brief notes about how to talk about this. But I think let's just start with what happened and let's frame it up a little bit.
Okay, so it actually started or happened 2 weeks ago today, and we all got to school that Monday morning, and we found out that one of our students and his father had gone up in their small plane the evening before, and they hadn't been seen since. So everyone was, on edge for the next few hours, and the firemen and search and rescue were out, and about 9:30 in the morning was when we officially got the news that they found the wreckage and that neither the father nor the son was a sophomore here at our high school, and they had both tragically perished together in the accident.
So, Melissa, how did everyone at the school, was it something that was in the news, or how did everyone end up finding out? You live in a pretty small town in Nebraska, so I'm sure word quickly spread then.
Yeah, and it's something I really give credit to our amazing crisis team here at school, and I just can't give them enough credit and really emphasize how important it is for schools to have a crisis team, for them to have thought through these things, because when you get down to that moment when an emergency happens, you're so immersed in that crisis and the tragedy and the emotions of the moment that it's hard to be objective. Luckily, we have an amazing crisis team, and they followed the protocol that we had laid out. So I think it was about 9:25 when the police, which we have a really good relationship with our local police staff and sheriff staff, and they notified the school that they had passed away. And I think it was 20 minutes later that our principal came around and handed each teacher a script of what to read. And the script really gave the entire message of confirming that our student had passed away, that our counselors were available if students needed to leave the classroom, go to where our counselors were at and talk with them. And, when I was talking to my mom about this, like the night that it happened, and she kind of bristled a little bit about, a script. Gosh, you had to read from a script. In that moment, though, it's really good for teachers to have that basic script, because there's nothing worse than having to tell students that they've lost a classmate and you're the one passing on that news. Yep. And it probably took me 3 or 4 times to even start reading it without breaking down. So just having that script at least allowed teachers to just focus on the words in front of them, and all of the messages were unified across all of the teachers in all of the classrooms. And that's how we notified the kids, because we knew if we didn't, they were going to find out on Instagram or social media or whatever, and we didn't want them to find out like that.
I think about this script thing is that, teachers are humans, and I can't imagine the words, and I'm pretty verbose, but I can't imagine what I would say. Yeah. So, having professionals that are knowledgeable in how to deal with this type of thing, even if they've if this is what they've been trained for, to be able to at least give you some basic vocabulary, because we're human, and it couldn't have been easy to even have to say, like you said, to get the words out that the script had, let alone to have to then think about what you would say on your own if you were left to your own your own devices, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also with the script, we were able to say, this is all we know, because then there were questions that the script didn't answer just because we didn't have the answers. And, we were able just to say, this is what we know at this time. We'll let you know more when we know it.
So the first day happens, and you get the script, and you have the counselors there. And obviously, so I've been through not a student loss, but like our principal's wife passed away while I was teaching, and that was really tough to deal with as well. She was a huge part of the school community. And I remember the day, and I remember having that crisis moment. That first couple hours of the day are really tough to get. Like, you just don't know, like even we talked about closing the school that day. That's how close she was in the community, right? Like, she was a big part, and we considered her a friend, all of us, even though we taught her kids, and her husband was our boss, but we could it was tragic. So I remember that first day pretty clearly. But kind of take us through a little bit, I guess, of how the first. So you said it's been 2 weeks. So how was last week? I mean, it just doesn't go away after the bell rings at whatever time, 3:30 on the Monday or whatever day it was, right?
Right. Just that whole day was pretty tough. It was actually a day that, I had testing planned, and for those kids who still wanted to do some testing, just because sometimes distraction and something else. Yeah. And then for those who didn't want to, absolutely not have to. Right. The next day, we were actually kind of blessed that the juniors and seniors were at a college fair and college visit all that day. That was already pre-planned. And so I took the counselor spot and went on that field trip. And it worked out really great, because just getting the juniors and seniors in another place and outside of school, they were able to, kind of laugh and joke around again a little bit. And then when we got back, the counselor, who's a good friend of mine, said it worked really well, that she just focused on the sophomores and a few of the freshmen who were really struggling with it. So it worked. Very lucky for us that we were able to kind of break apart those two groups that day. And gradually after that, every day was a little bit easier. The sophomore class was hit the hardest because he was a classmate of theirs. And then last Monday were the services. And of course that was a tough day. And we went through that same discussion here of, do you have school? Do you not have school? What's the right decision to make there? But just the closure of that day, I think, really helped. And they're getting back to their old giggly selves again. It's never something that you forget, but you have to kind of find a way to move on. And for the most part, I think they're starting to get there, especially this week.
So Melissa, when I had a student that I lost, that was in one of my Spanish classes. He died in a car accident. I think it was probably a Monday or a Tuesday. And we didn't know if we should have school the next day, but it was great that we did in retrospect, because we needed to. All of us, teachers, needed to be able to go ahead and have a moment to be able to heal. The students needed to be able to get their emotions out. We needed that crisis team in place, that same thing that what you were just talking about. But I also remember that as far as at the end of that week, and this is probably happening for you right now, this kid was a football player, and there was a game scheduled for that Friday. And the other team said, we can reschedule this. We can, we don't have to, do this. And the students and the football players, football team, whatever, were adamant that they play that that game. And man, talk about a mix of emotions, crazy. You're playing this game, and then but you also have your student there that's not there anymore, your student athlete. So moving forward, has your administration and your teachers talked about what would you do next as far as the next steps?
I don't know what our next steps are. We did he was a cross country runner, so very similar to the football situation. They still ran in that next meet,
Yes.
which was the Saturday, and they did the entire meet before the boys ran. They paused. Our boys team went out and did a balloon release. And it was just a really kind of a touching ceremony. From here on out, I don't know if there's anything necessarily formal that we have planned. I know that, we always remind kids that, we have counselors available, and my school just has the best counselor. And I don't say that just because she's my best friend. She really is the best counselor ever. And just remaining there and supportive of the kids, and knowing that it's not just magically going to be over for a lot of them. Even though some of them are kind of moving on right now, it might be situations of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, where some of the kids are going to have some more difficult days. And we as teachers have to be aware of that and respectful of that when that comes, and understand that the grieving isn't necessarily over just because the funeral is.
Yes.
And I was thinking about that because in my principal's office, he had pictures of his wife that he didn't take down, right? And it's like, so every time you walked into the office, you saw her face, and you're like, oh, and it was heartbreaking, right? And so these kids and you and your teachers you're gonna come across things that are going to remind you of your student, and going forward, like it doesn't just end when, the formalities, for lack of better words, are
Right.
over. That, you need to be present in your student body's kind of life, I guess, to, demonstrate that you're there for them, even if it's in June, but something could come up in June that reminds a student of this person, and it all comes back really quick.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting here thinking about my situation, and it's all coming back to me really quick. So that support has to be ongoing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is it, not even just ongoing for this year, but he was a sophomore, so this is going to continue on. And and it's becomes double then, even as a mother, because he was part of my daughter's inner circle. So doing with it at school, and then also helping her cope at home. And as teenagers, they're still growing, and their emotions are still really strong, and helping them, making sure that they still have strong mental health as they grieve. And that's tough. As a parent and a teacher.
Have you, do you know of any kind of connections the school has had with the family members, the surviving family members, and has there been any outreach to them on behalf of the school itself, or the principal, or anything like that? Do you know of anything like that?
I don't know of any, but part of it is that the student was the youngest one.
Okay.
I taught his sister a few years ago. I taught his cousin. And I think he's got 1 or 2 younger cousins. I'm not sure if they go to school in this district, though. I don't think they do. So I don't know how much necessarily outreach there has been there. Okay. Had he had younger siblings in the district, it would be a lot different. And it would be, we were able to kind of concentrate most of the crisis trauma to the high school, with some 8th grade students affected. And I had a son affected there too. But in a situation like that, if there would have been younger siblings, it could have affected multiple schools in our district.
So, I mean, I don't know how else to put. How are you doing? How are the teachers doing? I think that this is, I can't imagine. Like I've had parents of kids pass away. I've had, like I said, sort of coworkers pass away, but I've never had a student, and I think that there's a difference there. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around how I would handle it and what I would do. So it's been a couple weeks, and how are you guys doing?
I think for the most part, okay. I think the teachers who specifically were teaching the sophomores are probably dealing with it a little bit more. I teach mainly juniors and seniors, so I think it's a little bit easier for me to move on than it is for those teachers who now have that empty seat in their class.
Yeah.
And I know that issue came up the other day in the sophomore English class when someone had brought up, when do we get our new seating charter? When are we switching our seats? And it was just, a harmless.
It all comes back.
But then, yes,
Yeah.
And then it's chaos, and it all comes back for that teacher who's a new teacher. And so, for her, it's still a lot more stress and dealing with it still on a daily basis.
So, Melissa, any last words or advice? I mean, I don't even know if there is such a thing, because I mean, I've been through it. There is no way to prepare, or as far as once you're in it, it's hard to describe how what it is like, and and how to move forward.
This is my second time going through it. I went through it probably 12, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this time, and I hate to use this kind of sterile word of organized, but I really can't emphasize enough the importance of that crisis team having a plan.
Yeah.
And if this happens, this is what we're going to do. These are going to be the steps. And I think most importantly that we found was continue on with school in some way. I mean, formal learning is not going to happen that day or even necessarily in the days to follow. But still having some kind of activity, even if it's, just a basic, pretty easy activity that students can work on their own. Because for some of them, they want that distraction, they need that distraction. And I also think back to, over the years, we've had 2 or 3 kids who have lost, at least 3, who have lost their fathers. And those kids amazingly will come to school that next day, or sometimes they're back at school that day. Mm-hmm. But why? Because they want that normalcy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to provide that for the kids who need that. And we took a little bit of heat for keeping school open the day of the services. But I also had a student who came up to me who said, I don't want to go. I don't want to be at home. I just want to be someplace where I don't have to deal with that trauma. Mm-hmm. And we still, we need to take care of those students too. We can't overlook those. So I think we just have to be thoughtful of all students and help meet their needs where we can. And we do that through just organization and planning. And it's something we don't want to do, and we as teachers don't want to think about. And hopefully, anybody listening to this never has to go through it. But it's not a bad thing for schools to have that plan, and for teachers to sometimes consider, what would I do if this happened? Because unfortunately it does.
Yeah. Melissa, thanks. I think hopefully was helpful to some folks who have to, think about these sort of things. Thanks so much for sharing your story and joining us to talk about it. It takes, something. I don't know what it takes, but it's tough. And I'm glad that you decided to come with us on it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for asking.
When we come back, Devin Young and Stephanie Carmichael from Classcraft are with us, and we're going to talk about story mode. So stay with us.
OnEducation is brought to you by FreshGrade. Are you spending too much time stumbling between apps and duplicating work? Want to spend more time connecting with your students? FreshGrade Next has powerful new lesson planning tools that give you the flexibility you need to focus on engaging and inspiring your students. FreshGrade Next is designed for teachers and made for learning. Integrated, simple, and powerful. To learn more about FreshGrade Next and sign up for your free account, visit freshgrade.com.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Our friends at Classcraft are back to chat about story mode, which launched this summer at ISTE. We're going to talk about how it's going so far and what's coming up next. So welcome to the podcast, Stephanie Carmichael and Devin Young. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us. Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So we've talked like super high level about story mode at ISTE with Sean and Devin, but Stephanie, maybe you can give us kind of a bit of a deeper dive. What exactly is story mode in Classcraft?
Yeah, so story mode is a series of pre-made stories that teachers can use in their classrooms to deepen student engagement with their lessons. So we're launching season 1 this fall. We have episode 3 coming out next week. And so we're releasing, basically it's the start of an ongoing narrative that will last the whole school year. So we've got an episode releasing every month, and in that is a few stories as well as illustrations and sometimes animations that go with that. And these stories are really cool because essentially they follow characters that are just like the avatars that students are creating when they play Classcraft. So what story mode allows us to do is to kind of provide deeper context to the fantasy IP of Classcraft. So the avatars and the world and everything that you're seeing in the game.
So just a follow-up question about the narrative then. Like, Classcraft has been a fantasy world, so it's still a fantasy world, right? It's still a fantasy narrative, so we're still talking like wizards and warriors and all that cool stuff, right? None of that went away?
We changed a little bit of that. It's funny, you're kind of, Stephanie and I have spent I don't know how many hours kind of basically trying not to make what we're doing cliche.
Okay.
And I think, we have warriors in the game. We're in the process of kind of phasing them out, in part just because it was something that some teachers kind of found a little problematic. Other teachers loved it, so it was a big decision for us to make. But essentially, we've really taken time this year to ground all the IP into the lore that we're building and to find creative solutions to keep making it fresh. And so it's definitely rooted in fantasy, but the high level premise is that there's these different tribes and they need to sort of work together to discover this world. And what they're doing is basically uncovering the sort of legend and mythology around this race that came before them. And they were very technologically advanced, actually. And so there's a little bit of this strange overlap of being in a fantasy setting, but also kind of exploring and addressing different themes around what happens when you're too powerful, or if you're pursuing knowledge and at a certain point it makes you stronger than other people. How do you react to that, or how do you deal with that? And so I think there's a lot of like kind of interesting things that we've been trying to work into the story this year, basically, that play on themes that would be relevant to students and what they're learning and kind of how they're thinking and perceiving the world.
Sure. New story, new characters. It's all cool. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
Devin, I was thinking about this. Classcraft is already super popular, or was super popular before this story mode among your teachers and your students. So what effect do you hope story mode has?
I think that for us, what we saw is that there's this real opportunity basically to give some depth to the experience with it. I think that a lot of teachers use Classcraft for, classroom management and kind of running their classroom. And I think that that's been really effective. I think that when we look at our work and our mission is really centered around driving student engagement, right? And so when we start looking at pop culture and mainstream, media and everything like that, there's a lot there to pick apart in terms of engagement. There's a lot of different companies that are trying to figure that out. There's obviously video games, but there's also why we binge watch TV and all these streaming services that are coming out this fall, the Disneys and the Apples and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, with story mode, what we're trying to tap into is what's been tried and true for forever, really, which is a good story engages you, right? And if we can connect that to a narrative,
absolutely,
then we're really giving teachers something that's powerful, that's going to actually bring around transformational change while their students actually enjoy it, right, and have a good time and are really inspired. And so, yeah, just trying to kind of marry those two things in a novel way. And I think that, the work that Stephanie and I and the storytelling team have been putting into it, it's really fruition of many years actually of work. We've been kind of developing this in the background with the characters and stuff. And now, it's starting to see the light of day. And for us, there's just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into it to make sure that it wasn't cliche and kind of cheesy, and that it's worth people's time, basically, to invest the energy, both the teachers, but especially even just the students, for reading it and caring about it.
Yeah, I think to add to what Devin is saying, it really is for us about deepening the engagement that Classcraft already offers. So students are already playing as guardians, mages, and healers as characters in the game, but what are the stories behind those characters, or the different backgrounds they're seeing of cities or mountains or beaches? What are those locations like? So our job through these stories is really to kind of bring those mysteries and secrets to the forefront, to create an adventure that the whole class can go on together that enriches the experience that Classcraft offers.
I was going to say, in the end, this has to be about the students, and it has to be a student-centered kind of experience. They have to want to do this, and if they don't, then really, what's the point, frankly? And so, the student experience in this has to be like a huge priority for you guys, right?
Yeah, for sure. Story mode really is a mirror to the student experience. So what happens with the characters in this world is that their world is dramatically changing. And that has a lot of parallels to student experience in terms of kids are growing up. They're having to learn to navigate new changes, to face new challenges, to interact with people who are very different from them, all while trying to take on new responsibilities and figure out where they fit in the world. So I think, in terms of the themes, we really wanted to kind of explore those different ideas within story mode and relate them to values that we have just as a company and within Classcraft, but also to social emotional learning as well.
So talk about social emotional learning, because I've actually been lucky enough to spend some time with Sean in Montreal this summer at the Serious Games conference, and he spoke a lot about Classcraft and social emotional learning, and it's become like a big important topic in education, and I've always been thrilled that Classcraft has seemed to be at the head of this, has really gotten ahead of, not just from like a trend perspective, because there might be a little bit of that, but this is certainly an important thing for us to be talking about. So talk about how Classcraft kind of aligns to social emotional learning.
Yeah, so what we do is we look at the SEL competencies outlined by CASTLE, so self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. We look at what actually goes into those, so actually what they mean. And from there, we map them back to the stories and especially to the characters. So we look at how we can have these characters maybe modeling those behaviors or maybe not modeling those behaviors, and what consequences that has on the world as well as their relationships with other characters. So in that way, story mode becomes a kind of experiential SEL that you can reflect on and discuss in the classroom.
I think it's also just like on a very fundamental level, the experience of Classcraft is about looking at, or sorry, the approach of Classcraft is about looking at the experience within the classroom. And when we talk about developing social emotional skills, it's not really about like necessarily going through a curriculum. It's about creating an environment where certain values and behaviors are encouraged, and that there's some reflection in that and all that kind of stuff. And so for us, where we find that we're particularly effective is through the lens of PBIS and then through the lens of SEL. And so there's a different set of levers basically that we're giving teachers, different than other approaches, say, where we're really kind of helping them rethink about how they're running their classroom to support those goals.
So can you guys give us a glimpse into what's next for story mode, or just what's next for Classcraft itself?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of ambitions for story mode. Right now, our goal is to finish season 1, which is going to carry us to the end of the school year. I think we want to look as well at different ways we can kind of augment the storytelling experience, either through products or through community. One thing we've done is we've created a story guidebook, which is a kind of Wikipedia that teachers and students, that they can explore to learn about the characters and the locations and everything that's popping up in the stories. So what we hope is it inspires them to actually write their own stories set in the Classcraft world, so that are aligned with story mode. And essentially what you can think of it as is they're looking at the nuggets of information that you'd find on the Wikipedia are kind of like ingredients that they can pick and choose and throw into a pot and cook up their own stories. So essentially what they're doing is they're borrowing elements from the Classcraft world that they're discovering, and they're using them to essentially write their own fan fiction. And what that allows them to do is go on more adventures than just the ones that we're providing them. It's also great for fostering creativity, for self-expression, and also just a collective experience in the classroom, which is really what story mode is about as well.
That's amazing. So, folks, if you want to get started checking out Classcraft, we strongly suggest you go to classcraft.com/OnEducation. You can go there and it'll take you where you need to go to get started. We've been pumped about this story mode stuff for quite a long time. It's right in our wheelhouse. We've talked about that for a while. It's kind of why we work with these folks. They're our friends, but this is exactly the kind of stuff that we're into. So again, classcraft.com/OnEducation. Thanks, Stephanie and Devin, for coming on the podcast. This has been awesome.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glen Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the Education Podcast Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Jennifer Gonzalez, Matt Miller, and many more by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at oneducationpod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found at Irv Spanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/oneducationpod. We're also on Instagram at oneducationpod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or the Google Play Store. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Classcraft, for supporting us. Check out classcraft.com/oneducation to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening, stay awesome, and see you soon.